The alien queen had ruled her empire for many decades. Her reign was marked by strength, intelligence, and careful planning. Under her leadership, the empire had grown from a small group of planets into a vast territory, stretching across the galaxy. She had always believed in her people and her army. They were loyal, disciplined, and fearless. Yet now, as she stood on the balcony of her palace looking out over the capital city, she felt something she had not felt in many years: fear. The skies were darkened by the shadows of enemy fleets. Ships of unfamiliar design hung in formation, their weapons ready, their presence threatening. The alien queen had fought many wars before, but this was different. The enemy was clever, patient, and unrelenting. Every attempt to counter their attacks had failed. Her generals were tired, her soldiers exhausted, and the people of the empire were growing restless. The streets of the capital were crowded with civilians, all of them watching the skies with wide eyes, waiting for the moment when destruction might strike. Inside the palace, the queen moved with a quiet grace, but her heart was heavy. She remembered the early days of her rule, when the empire had celebrated victories with festivals, music, and joy. Back then, her people had trusted her completely, believing in her vision for a peaceful and prosperous empire. She had been young, confident, and full of hope. Now, she felt the weight of years pressing down on her, and with it, the possibility that everything she had built might crumble. The council room was filled with her advisors, generals, and strategists. Maps of star systems, troop movements, and supply lines covered the walls. Holographic displays flickered, showing the positions of the enemy fleet in real time. Her generals argued loudly, each offering solutions, each convinced that their plan was the one that would save the empire. But none of their plans inspired the confidence the queen needed. She listened carefully, weighing each suggestion, but inside, she knew that no ordinary tactic would turn the tide of this war. Her advisors spoke of retreats, alliances, and desperate strikes. They spoke of sacrifice, of holding the line at all costs. But the queen saw the exhaustion in their eyes, the uncertainty that they tried to hide. They had been fighting for weeks without rest, without clear victory, and their morale was breaking. She had to act quickly yet wisely, because the fate of her people depended on her decisions. Outside, the people of the empire were gathering in the city square. The queen had promised to address them, to give them hope in the face of fear. She descended from the palace balcony, moving through corridors lined with statues of past rulers, each carved in stone to remind the people of their legacy. Her presence commanded attention, her movements confident despite the tension she felt. As she entered the square, thousands of eyes turned toward her, watching, waiting, hoping. The crowd was tense. Families clutched one another, children stared, wide-eyed, and elders whispered prayers to the old gods of the empire. The queen raised her hand and the crowd fell silent. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. She reminded them of the empire's history, of the victories they had achieved together, and of the courage that had carried them through past hardships. She spoke of resilience, of unity, and of the belief that even in the darkest times, they could find a path to survival. Yet as she spoke, she could sense the doubt in the crowd. Their fear was contagious. She knew that speeches alone could not change the course of the war, but she also knew that a leader's presence could inspire courage. She moved among the people, shaking hands, nodding to families, listening to their concerns. She could see the exhaustion in their faces, the worry in their eyes, but also glimpses of hope, a small spark that could grow if she nurtured it. As she moved through the crowd, she noticed a human standing quietly at the edge of the gathering. Unlike the others, he did not fidget, panic, or look away. His calm presence seemed almost out of place in the sea of fear surrounding him. The queen felt a strange curiosity. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. Most had stayed on their own planets, uninterested in alien politics or wars. Yet here was one, observing with quiet intelligence, his eyes fixed on the queen as if he understood something the others did not. The queen continued her tour of the square, greeting citizens and listening to their fears. She felt a growing sense of responsibility. She had always known that leadership was not only about power but also about empathy. Her people needed her to be strong, not just in command, but in spirit. They needed to believe that the empire could survive, that the alien queen could guide them through the darkness. Even as she focused on her people, she could not ignore the threat looming in the skies above. Enemy ships had begun to move closer to the city, their engines glowing ominously. Scouts reported that the enemy was preparing for an assault, and the queen knew that the time for words was almost over. Decisions had to be made, strategies chosen, and courage demonstrated. The survival of her empire depended on action as much as inspiration. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the city, the queen made her way back to the palace. She paused on a balcony overlooking the square, taking a moment to breathe and collect her thoughts. The crowd was still there, waiting for her guidance, waiting for a sign of hope. And somewhere among them she could still see the human, standing quietly, observing everything. She did not know yet what role he would play, but she felt that his presence mattered. Somehow, she sensed that the future of the empire might hinge on this unexpected observer. Back in the council room, the queen gathered her generals once more. She reviewed the positions of her troops, the movements of the enemy, and the limited resources she had left. Every decision carried weight. Every order could save lives or cost them. She realized that this war was not just a battle of ships and weapons, but a test of leadership, courage, and faith in the unexpected. Her mind wandered briefly to the people she had seen in the square. She thought of their faces, their fear, and the spark of hope that remained. She knew that leaders were shaped not only by victories but by the choices they made in moments of uncertainty. And in this moment, standing at the edge of defeat, she understood that survival required more than strategy. It required vision, trust, and perhaps the willingness to embrace the unknown. As night fell, the city was quiet, except for the distant hum of engines and the soft murmur of the crowd. The alien queen stood alone on her balcony for a few moments, watching the stars. She knew that tomorrow would bring challenges unlike any she had faced before. The empire's survival was at stake, and every decision would count. But she also knew that even in despair there could be hope. Even in the darkest hour, courage could emerge in the most unexpected places. And somewhere in the crowd, a human watched silently, unaware that his presence alone was beginning to stir change. The queen felt a flicker of something she had not felt in a long time. Possibility. Perhaps, just perhaps, the fate of her empire was not yet sealed. Perhaps help could come from where she least expected it. With that thought, she turned back toward her council, ready to face the war that awaited, determined to fight not just for victory, but for the future of her people. The night deepened, and the alien queen prepared herself for the battles to come. She reviewed plans, considered options, and thought about the unknown observer in her crowd. She did not yet know how this human would influence the course of events, but she knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, survival depends not only on strength and strategy, but on the courage of those who act when others hesitate. And with that, the first part of the story came to a close, leaving the queen and her people standing on the brink of uncertainty, their fate hanging by a thread, and the quiet presence of a human in the crowd waiting to make a difference. Among the crowd in the capital city, the human stood quietly, observing the alien queen and the people around her. Unlike the aliens, he did not raise his voice or move nervously. He did not join in the murmurs of fear or excitement. Instead, he watched carefully, studying the behavior of those around him. Every gesture, every expression, every movement told him something important. He had learned to read situations quickly, and he knew that in times of crisis, the smallest actions could have the largest consequences. The human had not come to this world by accident. He had spent years traveling through space, learning the languages and cultures of different planets. His own planet was small but curious, and its people were explorers by nature. When he learned of the alien empire, he wanted to understand it, not to conquer, not to interfere, but to see how beings so different from humans lived thought and survived. Over time, he had developed a respect for the queen and her people, admiring their discipline, their intelligence, and their loyalty. As he stood in the crowd, he remembered the journey that had brought him here. He had left his home planet with nothing but a small ship, a few supplies, and a desire to see the universe. He had visited countless worlds, each unique, each filled with wonders and dangers. He had encountered species that could bend light to become invisible, civilizations that could manipulate energy for travel and communication, and societies that lived in harmony with planets so harsh that survival seemed impossible. Yet none of these experiences had prepared him for the sight of the alien empire on the verge of collapse. The human had learned to remain calm in dangerous situations. He understood that panic could spread quickly, that fear could paralyze even the strongest armies. As he observed the queen, he noticed the tension in her posture, the fatigue in her eyes, and the weight of responsibility she carried. She moved with confidence, but it was clear to him that she was deeply aware of the stakes. The empire's future rested on her decisions, and the people looked to her for guidance, for courage, and for hope. Unlike the citizens around him, the human did not see only fear and despair. He saw opportunity. He saw the chance to make a difference, to help a civilization that had never known him and yet needed someone to act. He did not know exactly how he would help, but he knew that standing still and doing nothing was not an option. He had learned long ago that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. The crowd began to disperse slightly as the queen moved among them, speaking words of encouragement, shaking hands, and listening to the concerns of her people. The human followed quietly, keeping a careful distance. He wanted to remain unnoticed but ready to act if the moment demanded it. He could see soldiers moving through the streets, their faces tense, their eyes scanning the skies for the enemy fleet. Civilians whispered to each other, sharing rumors and fears, and yet a few brave voices cheered as the queen passed by. As the queen concluded her speech, she turned to look over the crowd. Her gaze swept across thousands of eyes, searching for signs of hope, loyalty, and courage. That was when she noticed him, the human. There was something different about him. Unlike others who looked away, he met her gaze steadily, calmly, without fear. It was as if he understood the weight of the moment, yet he was not overwhelmed by it. Something in his demeanor suggested intelligence, insight, and perhaps even a quiet determination to help. After the speech, the human moved closer to the edge of the square. He had spent years learning about alien tactics, strategies, and technologies. He knew enough to understand the critical weaknesses in both the Empire and its enemies. He had observed the recent battles from a distance, noting patterns in enemy attacks, weaknesses in supply lines, and moments where hesitation had cost the Queen's forces dearly. His mind worked quickly, connecting ideas, analyzing outcomes, and preparing for the moment when he could act. At the same time, the human reflected on the aliens themselves. He had learned that they were intelligent, social creatures with complex emotions, deep loyalties, and a strong sense of honor. Unlike humans who often relied on improvisation, aliens tended to follow rules, plans, and strategies with precision. That precision could be their greatest strength, but it could also be a weakness when faced with unpredictable situations. He had spent months studying these tendencies, preparing himself for the moment when his knowledge might be needed. As night approached, the human noticed movement in the enemy fleet. He observed patterns in their formation, the timing of their approach, and the signals they sent to each other. He realized that they were not invincible. Every force had weaknesses, and every plan had flaws. The key was to find those weaknesses and act decisively. He began formulating ideas, considering how the Queen's forces could take advantage of enemy mistakes without unnecessary risk. He did not speak yet. He was still studying, still calculating, and waiting for the right moment. Meanwhile, the Queen returned to her palace, unaware of the human's careful observations. She entered her council room, where generals and advisors continued to argue over the next move. They were exhausted and frustrated, unsure which direction to take. The human had learned that fear often clouded judgment, and he knew that if he spoke wisely, He could help the Queen see possibilities her generals had missed, but he needed her attention, and he needed the right timing. Patience would be critical. Over the following hours, the human observed small acts of courage and despair throughout the city. Soldiers helped civilians take shelter, families shared food and comfort, and some citizens, despite fear, offered words of encouragement. The human understood that morale was fragile but essential. Even a small spark of hope could grow into a powerful force if nurtured. He made a mental note. Any plan must inspire not just strategy but courage in those who followed it. The Queen spent the night reviewing battle reports, analyzing maps, and discussing possible strategies with her generals. She was strong, intelligent, and determined, but even she could see the limits of her options. The human, observing from a quiet corner of the city, realized that she had the ability to act decisively if given the right information and a new perspective. He began formulating a strategy that combined alien discipline with human adaptability, understanding that innovation often came from blending different approaches. By early morning, the human had prepared his ideas. He knew that he could not simply give orders. He needed to earn the Queen's trust. He needed to show insight, courage, and understanding of both the enemy and her people. His plan would be risky, but he believed it could turn the tide of the Saur war if implemented correctly. He also understood that even the smallest misstep could lead to disaster. Timing, precision, and careful communication would be everything. The next day, the city square filled again with civilians and soldiers. The Queen appeared, moving through the crowd, her expression determined. She spoke words of encouragement, rallying her people with confidence and calm authority. The human stepped forward slightly, positioning himself where she could notice him without alarming the crowd. He did not speak yet. He only observed, waiting for the right moment to make his presence known. As the enemy fleet moved closer, a sense of urgency filled the city. Signals from scouts indicated that an attack was imminent. The Queen's generals debated defensive maneuvers and the citizens held their breath. The human realized that this was the moment to act. He had studied the enemy, understood the weaknesses, and developed a plan that could exploit them. But he needed the Queen's attention, and he needed to present his ideas clearly and calmly. He stepped forward slightly, making eye contact with the Queen. There was no fear in his eyes, only focus and determination. The Queen noticed him and felt a strange sense of curiosity. There was something different about this human, something that suggested he might have insight worth hearing. The generals noticed too, some frowning, unsure why the human drew her attention. But she made a decision. She would listen. The human spoke, carefully choosing his words. He outlined a strategy that combined alien military precision with human adaptability. He suggested ways to reposition forces, exploit enemy weaknesses, and inspire the citizens to contribute without risking unnecessary lives. His plan was detailed, well thought out, and innovative. For the first time in many days, the Queen felt a spark of hope. Here was someone who saw possibilities she had not considered, who offered a new perspective without arrogance or fear. The Queen listened closely, asking questions, and the human responded calmly, explaining each step with clarity. The generals began to see merit in the plan, realizing that combining their strengths with human insight could indeed change the course of the battle. Slowly, confidence began to return to the council room. The Queen, inspired by the human's courage and wisdom, made a bold decision. They would implement the plan immediately, acting quickly and decisively to take advantage of the enemy's momentary weaknesses. As preparations began, the human moved quietly among the troops, offering guidance where needed. He did not seek recognition, reward, or power. His goal was simple: to help the Queen and her people survive. Soldiers noticed his calm confidence, and it spread to their own hearts. Civilians saw hope reflected in their leaders and began to trust that even in the darkest hour, the alien Queen knew that the moment of decision had arrived. She stood in her council room, her eyes moving across the faces of her generals, advisors, and soldiers. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone could feel it. The enemy fleet was closing in, their ships moving with precision and intent. Any hesitation now could mean disaster. For days, the Queen had weighed options, reviewed plans, and considered strategies. But now she realized that no ordinary plan would suffice. The Empire needed something bold, something unexpected, and something that would inspire courage in both her soldiers and her people. She looked at the human who had stepped forward earlier. His calm presence had remained steady, even under pressure, and his plan had opened her eyes to possibilities she had not considered. She had spent decades leading her empire, but sometimes wisdom comes from the most unlikely sources. This human, an outsider by every measure, had given her a perspective that could change the course of the war. She trusted him, not because she knew him well, but because she saw the clarity of thought and courage in his actions. The generals were debating furiously, each presenting tactical plans that relied on conventional methods. One suggested a full-scale attack on the enemy's left flank. Another proposed retreating to fortified positions to regroup and defend the capital. Both plans carried risks, and the Queen could see the exhaustion and fear in their faces. Her people were counting on her. But she also knew that confidence in leadership must be matched by decisive action. She had to act, and she had to act soon. The human spoke quietly, not to interrupt but to offer guidance. He pointed out weaknesses in the enemy formation, opportunities that had been overlooked, and ways to inspire both the soldiers and civilians to contribute without being exposed to unnecessary danger. His plan was unusual, combining the precision and discipline of the aliens with flexibility and adaptability, often seen in human strategies. The generals were skeptical at first, but as he explained his reasoning step by step, they began to see the potential in his approach. The Queen felt a surge of hope. She realized that victory would not come from brute force alone, nor from cautious hesitation. It would come from creativity, courage, and the willingness to take calculated risks. She made a decision. They would follow the human's plan. Orders were given quickly, moving soldiers into new positions, deploying resources to unexpected locations, and preparing for the enemy's approach. Each step was coordinated carefully, ensuring that timing and precision would maximize the chance of success. As preparations continued, the Queen moved among her troops, speaking words of encouragement and observing their readiness. Soldiers who had been fearful and hesitant now stood taller, inspired by the presence of their leader and the knowledge that a new plan offered hope. The human moved quietly among them as well, offering guidance where needed, checking equipment, and ensuring that everyone understood their role. He did not seek recognition or praise. His goal was simple: to help the Queen and her empire survive. The enemy fleet was now visible on the horizon, their ships glinting in the light of the distant sun. Scouts reported that they were moving into position, expecting the Queen's forces to follow predictable patterns. The human had anticipated this, and his plan relied on the enemy's assumption of conventional tactics. By breaking these expectations, they could create confusion and hesitation in the opposing forces, giving the Queen's army a critical advantage. The Queen addressed her generals one last time. She reminded them of their history, of the victories they had achieved together, and of the courage that had brought them this far. She emphasized the importance of trust in her leadership, trust in the human who had offered insight, and trust in each other. Confidence spread through the room as she spoke, and for the first time in days, the generals nodded with determination rather than doubt. Orders were executed quickly and efficiently. Troops moved into new formations, defensive positions were reinforced, and special units prepared for surprise maneuvers. Civilians were guided to safe locations, and volunteers assisted where possible, carrying supplies, tending to the wounded, and maintaining communication lines. The city itself became a coordinated network of defense and support, a testament to the leadership and careful planning of the Queen and the human advisor. As the battle began, the enemy launched their first strikes. Lasers and energy blasts lit up the sky, and ships maneuvered with deadly precision. At first, the Queen's forces faced heavy pressure. Some positions were tested to their limits, and soldiers had to rely on training, discipline, and courage to hold their ground. The human observed carefully, noting every movement, every response, and adjusting his guidance as needed. His calm presence was like a steady hand guiding a complex machine, ensuring that each element worked in harmony with the others. The turning point came when the human suggested a coordinated maneuver that the enemy had not anticipated. Using smaller, agile units, the Queen's forces could flank the enemy and disrupt their formation. The generals hesitated initially, worried about the risk, but the Queen's confident decision inspired them to act. Soldiers executed the maneuver with precision, and the enemy fleet, caught off guard, struggled to adapt. Confusion spread among their ranks, giving the Queen's forces a critical advantage. In the city, civilians watched in awe as the battle unfolded. Though they were protected in safe zones, they could see the brilliance of strategy and courage in action. They cheered when alien soldiers succeeded in pushing back enemy units, and they encouraged each other to remain strong. The morale of the Empire, which had been so fragile, was now growing steadily, fueled by visible proof that hope and courage could triumph even in the darkest moments. The Queen remained at the command center, coordinating efforts, observing reports, and making decisions in real time. She relied on the human's insight to anticipate enemy moves, adapt strategies, and optimize resource deployment. The human's presence was subtle but critical, providing guidance without taking control, ensuring that the Queen remained the leader while offering perspectives that had not been considered before. As the battle continued, the enemy realized that they were facing not just a conventional force, but a force that could adapt and innovate. Their initial confidence began to waver as their formation was repeatedly disrupted. Smaller units, guided by human insight and alien precision, launched targeted strikes that weakened key enemy positions. Communication lines within the enemy fleet were disrupted, creating confusion and slowing their response. The momentum was shifting, and the Queen could feel it in every report, every signal, and every movement across the battlefield. Amidst the chaos, the human continued to move strategically, observing, advising, and guiding without drawing attention to himself. His calm demeanor inspired confidence in those around him. Soldiers began to trust not only the Queen, but the subtle guidance that seemed to appear when most needed. Each success, no matter how small, built upon the last, creating a ripple effect of courage and effectiveness that strengthened the entire Empire's forces. By mid-battle, the Queen could see the results of the human's plan. The enemy was struggling to maintain cohesion, their confidence shaken, and their movements predictable. The human had anticipated key reactions, allowing the Queen's forces to exploit weaknesses at critical moments. Every decision, every maneuver, and every action taken under his guidance contributed to a growing advantage that was beginning to turn the tide of war. In the heat of the moment, the Queen felt a surge of admiration and gratitude toward the human. She realized that sometimes leadership requires humility, the ability to recognize wisdom and courage in unexpected places. The human had not sought power or recognition. He had acted out of intelligence, foresight, and a desire to help. His actions had provided a spark that could ignite hope in the hearts of an entire empire. The final phase of the battle approached. The enemy, sensing the shift in momentum, attempted a desperate counterattack. They concentrated their forces on a critical location, hoping to break the Queen's defenses and regain control. The Queen, guided by the human's insight, anticipated this move. She repositioned units, reinforced weak points, and prepared for a decisive maneuver that would exploit the enemy's overconfidence. As the enemy launched their attack, the Queen's forces executed a coordinated response. Agile units struck at critical positions, disrupting communication and supply lines. Defensive formations held strong, absorbing the brunt of the assault. Civilians assisted in minor but crucial ways, ensuring that support systems remained operational and soldiers could focus on the front lines. The battle raged with intensity, but the advantage now clearly lay with the Queen and her forces. By the end of the day, the enemy was forced to retreat. Their strategy had failed, their formation disrupted, and their morale broken. The Queen's forces had held strong, adapted quickly, and exploited every opportunity. Victory, though hard won, was theirs. The human had played a critical role, offering insight, guidance, and courage at the moments that mattered most. The Queen knew that the Empire had survived not only because of strength, but because of intelligence, adaptability, and trust in unexpected allies. As night fell, the battlefield quieted. Soldiers returned to their positions tenderly. The victory in the initial battle had brought relief to the alien queen and her people, but she knew that the war was far from over. The enemy, though weakened and disorganized, still had forces scattered across nearby systems, and they were likely regrouping for another attempt. The Queen understood that survival required more than a single victory. It required a complete turning of the tide, a demonstration that the Empire could adapt, fight, and win even against overwhelming odds. She knew that this moment would test not only strategy and strength, but also leadership and the courage of everyone under her command. The human, whose calm guidance had turned the first battle in their favor, now worked closely with the Queen and her generals to plan the next phase. Unlike previous battles, this plan would rely on the coordination of both military and civilian efforts. Soldiers had to remain disciplined, following precise instructions, while civilians would contribute in ways that maximized efficiency without risking lives unnecessarily. The human had observed the alien way of organizing forces and knew how to combine it with flexible human strategies, creating a plan that was unexpected, innovative, and powerful. The Queen addressed her generals, explaining the overall strategy in detail. She emphasized adaptability, communication, and precision. Every unit, every soldier, and every civilian contribution had a purpose. They were no longer acting as isolated groups but as part of a carefully orchestrated system, each piece reinforcing the other. The human's insight had shown her that even small actions could have a profound impact if coordinated correctly. This approach required trust, quick thinking, and courage, and the Queen knew that the morale of her people would be just as important as the technology and weapons at their disposal. As preparations continued, the human moved quietly among the troops, observing, guiding, and adjusting where necessary. He offered advice without commanding, suggested improvements without imposing authority, and demonstrated skills that inspired confidence. Soldiers who had been hesitant during the first battle now moved with purpose, trusting not only in their leaders but in the guidance they received. Civilians were encouraged to assist in communication, resource distribution, and basic logistics, ensuring that everyone could contribute meaningfully without stepping into danger. The enemy, still reeling from their initial defeat, underestimated the speed and coordination of the alien Queen's forces. They assumed that fear and exhaustion would limit the Empire's ability to act decisively. But the human had foreseen this overconfidence. His plan relied on the enemy expecting hesitation, predictability, and conventional tactics. By using unconventional strategies and flexible movements, the Queen's forces could exploit these assumptions, striking at critical moments when the enemy least expected it. Early in the day, scouts reported that enemy ships were moving toward key supply routes, intending to disrupt the flow of resources to the capital and weaken the Empire further. The Queen, guided by the human's insight, repositioned units in a coordinated response. Agile strike teams moved to intercept the enemy, while defensive formations protected essential supply lines. Communication lines were monitored, and backup plans were ready in case the enemy attempted unpredictable maneuvers. Every decision was calculated, precise, and designed to create maximum effect while minimizing risk. The battle began in earnest, and the skies above the capital became a theater of movement, strategy, and controlled chaos. Enemy ships launched attacks, but the Queen's forces responded quickly, using maneuvers that disrupted the enemy's formation. Smaller units flanked enemy positions, defensive formations absorbed pressure without collapsing, and agile strike teams exploited weaknesses that had been carefully identified. Civilians observed from safe locations, their fear giving way to hope as they saw their soldiers succeed. The morale of the Empire rose with every successful maneuver, and confidence spread like wildfire through the ranks. The human continued to play a critical role, moving strategically to observe the flow of battle and offer guidance where needed. He did not command directly but provided insights that helped the Queen anticipate enemy actions, deploy resources efficiently, and adjust tactics in real time. His presence inspired not just soldiers, but leaders, reminding them that courage and intelligence often worked hand in hand. Every decision he influenced reinforced the strength of the Empire, turning a tense, chaotic situation into a controlled and effective response. As the battle progressed, the enemy attempted a counteroffensive, concentrating their remaining forces in an attempt to regain lost ground. The Queen and the human had anticipated this move. Coordinated units executed precise maneuvers, cutting off supply lines and isolating enemy ships. Defensive formations held strong, while strike teams hit critical targets, disrupting communication and creating confusion. The enemy fleet, once confident in their superiority, now found themselves reacting to the unexpected precision and adaptability of the Queen's forces. Civilians, though mostly observers, contributed in ways that amplified the effectiveness of the battle. Volunteers helped maintain communication networks, distribute medical supplies, and ensure that soldiers could focus on their objectives without distraction. Families offered shelter to those displaced by minor skirmishes, and community leaders organized resources to ensure that no critical need went unmet. The human had anticipated this participation, understanding that morale and support were as essential to success as weapons and strategy. The turning point came when the Queen executed a decisive maneuver suggested by the human. She led a coordinated strike that targeted the enemy's command ships using a combination of diversionary attacks and precise focused assaults. The enemy, unprepared for such an approach, found their leadership disrupted and their forces disorganized. Confusion spread quickly, and units that had been well positioned became vulnerable. The Queen's forces, disciplined and coordinated, seized the advantage and pressed forward, forcing the enemy into retreat. During this critical moment, the Queen noticed the human standing calmly on a high observation platform. His presence was steady, his guidance having flowed seamlessly through every aspect of the battle. She realized that his contribution had been essential, not because he wielded power directly, but because he had provided insight, clarity, and the ability to act decisively in moments of uncertainty. The human had reminded her that courage often comes not from strength alone but from vision, preparation, and the willingness to act when others hesitate. As the enemy retreated, the Queen's forces pursued with caution, ensuring that no remaining threats could regroup. The battlefield, once filled with tension and chaos, gradually shifted to one of controlled order. Soldiers tended to the wounded, repaired damaged equipment, and maintained vigilance for any further attacks. Civilians emerged from safe zones, offering aid, cheering successes, and helping restore order. The sense of unity and purpose that had been absent at the beginning of the war was now firmly established, fueled by visible results and inspired leadership. The human, satisfied that the immediate crisis had passed, began helping the Queen plan for long-term security. He worked closely with her generals, reviewing the enemy's likely next moves, analyzing strengths and weaknesses, and preparing strategies to prevent future attacks. His understanding of both human and alien tactics allowed him to propose solutions that were innovative, practical, and adaptable. The Queen, recognizing the value of his insight, incorporated his recommendations into the Empire's broader defense plans. In the aftermath of the turning point, the Queen addressed her people. She spoke of courage, unity, and the importance of collective action. She praised her soldiers for their discipline and bravery, her civilians for their resilience and support, and acknowledged the unexpected role of the human who had helped guide their efforts. The crowd, once tense and fearful, now erupted in cheers and applause, celebrating not only survival but renewed hope. The Queen understood that inspiration was a powerful weapon, and by recognizing contributions from every quarter, she strengthened the bonds that held the Empire together. As night fell, the battlefield quieted. The Queen and the human reviewed reports, assessed the condition of her forces, and prepared for any remaining threats. While the immediate danger had passed, the lessons of the day were clear. Adaptability, courage, and unity were critical to survival. The human had shown that even an outsider acting selflessly and wisely could change the course of events. His presence had reminded the Queen and her people that hope could emerge in unexpected ways, and that leadership required humility as well as strength. By the end of the day, the Queen reflected on the transformation that had occurred. The Empire, once on the verge of defeat, had now gained momentum. Soldiers were confident, civilians were inspired, and the enemy was in retreat. The human, whose calm guidance had been central to this success, had demonstrated that even in the darkest hour, intelligence, observation, and courage could create opportunities that seemed impossible. The Queen realized that the survival of her people was not only about strategy and strength, but also about vision, insight, and the willingness to embrace help when it appeared unexpectedly. The city, quiet now except for the soft hum of activity and repair, seemed. The battle was over and the immediate threat to the Empire had passed. The alien Queen stood on a balcony overlooking her capital city, watching as her people began to restore order. The streets, which had been filled with fear and tension just days ago, were now alive with activity. Soldiers and civilians moved together, repairing damage, distributing supplies, and helping the wounded. The atmosphere was no longer one of despair but of cautious optimism. Every action, no matter how small, seemed to carry the promise of a new beginning. The Queen reflected on the events that had brought them to this point. Just days earlier, she had faced the very real possibility of defeat. Her empire had been on the brink of collapse, her forces exhausted and her people fearful. Yet through courage, intelligence, and a willingness to act decisively, they had not only survived but turned the tide of war. Central to this victory had been the human who had quietly observed from the crowd and offered insight at critical moments. His presence had been unexpected yet transformative. The human, standing slightly apart from the crowd, observed the city with calm satisfaction. He had no desire for recognition or reward. His goal had always been simple: to help where his skills and understanding could make a difference. Watching the citizens work together, seeing the soldiers regain confidence, and noting the Queen's renewed determination, he felt that he had accomplished what he came to do. Yet he remained alert, knowing that the safety of the Empire required continued vigilance. In the following days, the Queen held meetings with her generals and advisors, reviewing the outcomes of recent battles and preparing for any further threats. The human's suggestions were incorporated into these discussions. His observations had highlighted not only tactical strengths but also opportunities to improve communication, morale, and resource allocation. His ideas were practical, innovative, and adaptable, providing the Queen with new ways to ensure that her empire remained strong and resilient. Civilians, too, began to understand the significance of the human's role. Stories spread throughout the city about the quiet outsider who had helped turn the tide of the war. People spoke in hushed tones about his insight, courage, and calm presence. Some were curious about him, others inspired, but all recognized that his actions had been a catalyst for change. Even soldiers, who had initially been skeptical of his advice, now expressed gratitude for the guidance that had helped them achieve success on the battlefield. The Queen, aware of the growing admiration for the human, made a conscious decision to acknowledge his contributions publicly. During a ceremony in the central square, she spoke to her people about courage, unity, and the importance of wisdom from unexpected sources. She praised her soldiers for their bravery, civilians for their support, and the human for his insight and guidance. The crowd, which had once been tense and fearful, erupted in applause, cheering not only for the victory but for the example of selfless courage that had made it possible. Despite the recognition, the human remained humble. He accepted the gratitude of the Queen and her people with quiet dignity. He did not seek power, titles, or material reward. His satisfaction came from knowing that he had helped the Empire survive, and that the people were now safer, more confident, and more united. He continued to work behind the scenes, assisting with rebuilding efforts, coordinating resources, and ensuring that the lessons learned during the conflict were applied to prevent future crises. As the weeks passed, the empire gradually returned to a sense of normalcy. Trade resumed between planets, citizens returned to their daily lives, and soldiers continued training to maintain readiness. Yet the memory of the recent conflict remained vivid. The Queen and her people understood that their survival had depended not only on strength and strategy, but also on adaptability, courage, and the willingness to embrace new perspectives. The human's role had demonstrated that sometimes insight from an unexpected source could change the course of events in ways that seemed impossible. The Queen spent time with her generals and advisors, reflecting on what had been learned. They discussed the importance of communication, innovation, and flexibility in leadership. They recognized that relying solely on traditional tactics and rigid hierarchies could leave the empire vulnerable in future conflicts. By incorporating human insight and approaches, they had gained a powerful new perspective that complemented their strengths and mitigated weaknesses. In addition to military and strategic lessons, the Queen also considered the broader impact on her people. Civilians who had once been fearful and uncertain now exhibited confidence and initiative. Communities that had struggled to function under the stress of war were now working together, repairing damage and strengthening social bonds. The Queen realized that leadership extended beyond commanding armies. It included inspiring hope, fostering unity, and empowering individuals to contribute in meaningful ways. The human, observing these developments, continued to provide guidance where necessary. He helped organize educational programs to teach citizens about emergency response, coordinated logistics for rebuilding damaged infrastructure, and advised on ways to maintain morale among both soldiers and civilians. His efforts ensured that the empire would be better prepared for any future challenges. His presence reminded everyone that courage, intelligence, and empathy could create lasting change, even in the most difficult circumstances. Over time, the bond between the Queen and the human grew stronger. Though they came from vastly different worlds, they shared mutual respect and admiration. The Queen recognized the value of his perspective, while the human understood the complexity and beauty of the alien civilization he had come to assist. Together, they became a symbol of cooperation and understanding, demonstrating that collaboration between diverse beings could achieve remarkable results. The citizens of the empire continued to celebrate their survival and newfound hope. Festivals were held, not only to honor the Queen and the soldiers, but also to recognize the human whose quiet courage had changed the course of history. Stories of his actions were shared throughout the empire, becoming part of the cultural memory and inspiring future generations to value intelligence, courage, and selfless action. In private moments, the Queen reflected on the lessons of the war. She realized that leadership was not about being the strongest or the most feared, but about listening, observing, and acting with insight and courage. She had been reminded that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and that wisdom and bravery can emerge in those who do not seek recognition or reward. The human had exemplified these qualities, and his influence would shape the empire for generations. As peace settled over the empire, the human prepared to depart. His mission, though transformative, had reached its natural conclusion. He had guided the Queen, inspired the people, and helped secure victory, but he belonged to a wider universe, one that still held countless opportunities for exploration and understanding. Before leaving, he met with the Queen one last time, sharing observations, advice, and encouragement for the future. She expressed her gratitude, acknowledging that the empire owed much of its survival and renewed strength to his quiet courage and insight. The human departed with the knowledge that his work had made a difference. Though he would return to his own world, the empire he had helped save would continue to thrive. Soldiers, civilians, and leaders carried forward the lessons learned, applying them to maintain security, strengthen unity, and ensure that future generations would benefit from the experiences of those who had endured the war. In the years that followed, the empire flourished. Trade expanded, new alliances were formed, and cultural exchanges enriched the lives of citizens across multiple planets. The Queen continued to lead with wisdom, courage, and humility, always remembering the human who had reminded her of the power of insight, observation, and selfless action. His example became a guiding principle for future leaders, emphasizing that true strength arises not only from military might but from collaboration, empathy, and the willingness to embrace new perspectives. The story of the human and the alien. Queen became a legend within the empire. Children grew up hearing tales of courage, wisdom, and unexpected heroes. Citizens reflected on the importance of hope, unity, and the potential for change even in the darkest times. The human's quiet presence in a moment of crisis had altered the course of history, demonstrating that one individual, acting with intelligence, courage, and selflessness, could make a profound difference. The Queen, now older and wiser, often looked to the stars and thought of the human who had helped her people when all seemed lost. She understood that the empire's survival had been a result of many factors: strength, strategy, determination, and above all, the ability to recognize and act upon unexpected opportunities. The human had reminded her that leadership is not about acting alone but about inspiring, listening, and embracing guidance wherever it may come from. And so the empire entered a new era of prosperity, guided by lessons learned in the darkest hours of war. Soldiers remained vigilant but confident, civilians remained hopeful but prepared, and the Queen continued to lead with wisdom and courage. The human's legacy endured, not only in the stories told across the empire but in the values, strate,